Welcome back to the deep dive. So, when we talk about the Silk Road, what's the first picture that pops into your head?
Let me guess.
I bet it's the same for most people. You probably see this dusty single highway, right? Maybe a long train of camels stretching across a desert carrying huge bales of beautiful Chinese silk.
Exactly. It's this romantic, almost cinematic image of East meeting West.
It's a simple, linear story, and it's a great story.
It is a great story. The thing is, that image is potent, it's universally recognized, and, well, it's almost entirely misleading.
And that right there is where we're starting our deep dive today.
We've got a fantastic stack of sources here, scholarly articles, archaeological reports, debates between historians, and they all fundamentally challenge that simple idea. We're going to show you that what we call the Silk Road was actually a complex, incredibly decentralized, sometimes chaotic, and amazingly resilient network of trade routes.
A network that basically defined the Eurasian global economy for what, over 1,500 years?
At least.
So our mission today is to kind of tear down that simplistic 19th century marketing, because you're right, it feels like marketing, and explore this intricate web of land and sea connections.
A web that really dictated the flow of wealth, power, and ideas in the ancient world.
We want to find out what really made this system run, and maybe more importantly, who the unsung essential players actually were.
Let's start right there with that branding problem you mentioned. The name Silk Road itself is, well, it's a modern invention.
It's not ancient.
Not at all. It comes from the German term Seidenstrasse. It was first coined in 1877 by a German geographer, Ferdinand von Richthofen. Then it was really cemented in the popular imagination by a Swedish geographer, Sven Hedin, in a book from 1938.
Okay, so let's just pause on that for a second. We're talking about a network that was active from, say, 130 BCE until the Mongol Empire started to fragment. That's a millennium and a half.
A huge span of time.
And for all that time, the people actually using it, they had dozens of names for different parts of it, but no one, not a single person, ever called it the Silk Road.
Nobody. That sounds incredibly reductive, doesn't it? Labeling this massive global infrastructure after just one single commodity.
It's like calling the entire global shipping system today the iPhone pipeline or something?
That's a perfect analogy. It totally misses the forest for one particularly shiny tree. And that's exactly why many contemporary historians, they adamantly prefer the term Silk Roads, plural, plural, because it more accurately captures the reality of what it was. This intricate, overlapping web of land and sea passages. It connected Central East, South, Southeast, and West Asia, and had these crucial offshoots into East Africa and Southern Europe.
That distinction, road versus routes, that feels like a really key insight. A road suggests central planning, a single path.
A to B.
But routes, that implies decentralization, competition, and people adapting on the fly based on, shifting politics.
Precisely. And we have to acknowledge some of the sources go even further. We have scholars, Warwick Ball is a notable one, who argue the term Silk Road is almost a myth of modern academia.
A myth?
His argument is that there wasn't really a single coherent overland system in the way we imagine it until the Mongols unified everything in the 13th century, the Pax Mongolica.
So why such a sharp criticism against a term that seems so, universally accepted?
The criticism is really rooted in a kind of geographical bias. It's argued that a lot of the literature on the Silk Road has privileged the sedentary illiterate empires at either end of Eurasia.
Meaning China and Rome.
Meaning the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire. And in doing that, it systematically sidelines the massive cultural and economic contributions of, say, the nomadic steppe cultures. And it ignores the absolutely essential roles played by civilizations like India and Iran.
So if you only focus on silk traveling between those two big empires at the ends, you completely miss the infrastructure, the middlemen, and just the sheer volume of other goods being traded in the middle.
It's like giving all the credit for a package delivery to the person who sent it and the person who received it, and completely forgetting the post office, the trucks, the planes, and the distribution centers in between.
And you mentioned alternatives. The sources say that depending on where you were standing, you might have called this something totally different.
Absolutely. The name you'd use depends entirely on which product or which civilization you're focusing on. William Dalrymple, for instance, argues that before the 13th century, you should really be talking about an India-dominated Golden Road.
The Golden Road.
He notes that Indian textiles, spices, and their dominance in maritime trade were arguably far more consequential than Chinese silk for most of the ancient world.
And what about the actual age of these routes?
Well, that's where the name is also deeply misleading. The southern parts of this network, especially the route from Khotan in Xinjiang to eastern China, were used for thousands of years before silk was even a major export.
How far back are we talking?
As early as 5000 BCE. This older southern route was dedicated to the trade of nephrite jade.
Jade.
It was crucial because it held this immense ritual and symbolic significance in ancient Chinese culture. It was often buried with emperors and high-status nobles.
5000 BCE. That predates the pyramids in Egypt.
By millennia. So for thousands of years in China, this was effectively the Jade Road. It linked the sources of the raw material to the centers of culture, long before the Romans even existed as a republic.
Wow. So this immediate realization that the name Silk Road is modern, it's contested, it's geographically biased, and it completely misses thousands of years of history driven by jade. That's a huge first takeaway.
It is. We are not studying a single road. We are studying a global phenomenon.
So if we strip away that myth of a single road and we acknowledge this huge decentralized network, how did it actually work? How did goods get across thousands of miles of, incredibly hostile deserts, mountains, and steppes?
The single most crucial functional element that you see in all the sources is the relay trade system.
A relay.
Yeah, this was not a modern integrated logistics chain where one company takes it from start to finish. We're told very explicitly that few individuals, very few caravans, ever traveled the entire length of the overland routes.
So that image of Marco Polo being the one guy who does the whole thing, that was the exception, not the rule.
The absolute exception. Goods didn't travel in a straight line. Instead, they would typically change hands many times before reaching their final destinations. It was a succession of regional middlemen.
And each one takes a cut, right?
Each one takes a cut, and each one is a specialist in securing their specific leg of the journey. So a bolt of Chinese silk might be owned first by a Xiongnu trader, then sold to a Sogdian who sells it to a Persian, before it finally reaches a Roman merchant in a port in the Levant.
That makes it sound less like a road and more like a massive staggered supply chain that relies completely on local trust and negotiated deals between all these different ethnic and linguistic groups.
It does. And if you ask who the absolute masters of that system were,
Who was it?
that role belongs, without any question, to the Sogdians.
The Sogdians. I feel like most people haven't even heard of them.
And yet, they were the linchpin. They were an Iranian people from the area around Samarkand and Bukhara in Central Asia. And they were, you could argue, the most vital group in this relay system for over 1,000 years.
So what was their secret? What made them so good at this?
Their linguistic and entrepreneurial versatility. Their language actually served as the lingua franca of Central Asian trade as early as the 4th century. But it was more than that.
It had to be.
It required a truly global diaspora. The Sogdians established these highly networked communities that stretched from their homeland in Samarkand all the way to the Chinese capital, Chang'an. They pioneered systems of credit and financial transfer. And their real genius was their ability to bridge cultural and imperial borders.
So they were seen as neutral partners?
Exactly. They were welcomed by the Persians, by the Turks, by the Chinese, because they were seen as just merchants. Their network was effectively the operating system of the Silk routes.
That's true decentralization then. The core of the economy wasn't run by the big empires, but by a stateless merchant class.
For a very long time, yes.
Okay, let's look at the specific arteries of this network. Let's start with those classic land routes that had to get around the huge geographical barriers in Central Asia.
The northern route is the one most people are familiar with.
Yep.
It typically started at the Han capital, Chenan, which is modern Xi'an or later Luoyang.
Okay.
From there, it traveled northwest through the Gansu province in China, but then it came up against the inevitable problem, the Taklamakan Desert and Lapanur.
And the Taklamakan's name means something ominous, doesn't it?
It means something like the desert you enter, you never return. So, it was a formidable barrier.
So how did they get around what was basically a giant shifting sand trap?
They didn't go through it, they skirted it. The route split into 3 main paths that hugged the mountain ranges on the north and south sides to get access to water and oases.
Ah, so they oasis hopped.
The oasis hopped. These routes would travel on the mountain ranges before finally rejoining at the critical oasis city of Kashgar. Kashgar was the gateway to the Pamir Mountains and everything to the west.
So what was coming into China on this route? Let's, bring those imports to life. What were people in Shenyang consuming?
The inbound goods were truly global luxuries. If you were wealthy in Chang'an, you might be eating dates, saffron powder, and pistachio nuts that came all the way from Persia.
Wow.
From Somalia, you'd be getting frankincense, aloes, and myrrh, which were essential for religious ceremonies and medicine. India provided sandalwood. And from as far away as Roman-controlled Egypt, you were importing these exquisite glass bottles.
Why glass bottles?
They were technologically superior to anything the Chinese could produce at the time. True luxury items.
It just makes you realize the sheer geographic scale required to get frankincense from the Horn of Africa all the way to Shan.
And of course, China returned the favor with the goods the network is named after. Silk brocade, delicate lacquerware, and the finest porcelain.
Okay, now moving south, there's the southern route, the Karakoram route.
Right. This path was much, much tougher. It was basically a single track going right through the imposing Karakoram Mountains. The modern Karakoram Highway roughly follows this path today.
That just sounds like an absolute nightmare of high altitudes and freezing cold.
It was reserved for the hardiest of travelers. After getting through those high mountains, it crossed the Hindu Kush into what is now Afghanistan, and then it would rejoin the northern route near Merv in modern Turkmenistan.
And Merv, that city must have been absolutely crucial. That seems to be the point where everything fanned out into the Western world.
Merv was an indispensable transit hub. From there, merchants had these critical western branches to choose from. One path went through northern Iran, across Mesopotamia, and hit the Levant cities like Antioch or Tyre.
Where ships would be waiting.
Right, where Mediterranean ships would pick up the high-value cargo and take it directly to Italy. Or another branch went via Susa down to the head of the Persian Gulf, and from there to Petra and Alexandria for immediate shipment to Rome. The whole network depended on these shifting, interconnected hubs.
We always focus on that east-west axis, China, Central Asia, Rome. But the sources are telling us we have to look south, too. There's this significant and often overlooked trade artery, the southwestern road.
Yes, sometimes called the Delta route. This was centered on the Ganges and Brahmaputra Delta in modern Bangladesh. And this area was a hub of international commercial interest for over 2 millennia. It completely reshapes the map.
And we have evidence for how old this road is?
We do. The first-century Roman writer Strabo actually commented on merchants sailing all the way from Egypt directly to the Ganges River.
Wow. So that shifts the focus dramatically. It wasn't just about China and Rome. The Indian subcontinent was this powerful, essential pivot point.
It really was. And we have the archaeological proof to back it up. Roman beads have been found in the ancient Wari-Bateshwar ruins in Bangladesh, which suggests deep connections going way back. This road is strongly suggested to be the path from Sichuan and Yunnan in China through Burma into Bangladesh.
The Lido route.
That's the one. And from the 12th century, sources say it was particularly important for shipping high-value bullion gold and silver from the rich mines in Yunnan, China, directly into those powerful delta trade centers.
Okay, so we've established the land routes were complex, they relied on relays, they were constantly fighting geography. But just to complicate the picture even more, we have to talk about the sea, the Maritime Silk Road.
Yes, and the sources are adamant about this. It should not be seen as just a simple extension of the land route.
Why not?
Because it operated under completely different logistical rules. First, ships could carry massive amounts of cargo. We're talking totally different economies of scale than a camel caravan. That means a far greater economic impact with every exchange.
Okay, that makes sense. More volume.
And second, and this is crucial, sea traders could often span the entire distance themselves. They could bypass that expensive, risky, and complicated regional relay system that was necessary on land.
So the economic power shifts with the mode of transport, and I'm guessing they could also avoid geopolitical problems on land.
Exactly. If a war broke out between two nomadic groups in Central Asia, the sea was still open. You might have to deal with pirates, but not with army checkpoints and new taxes.
Who are the main players on the sea?
Well, this is what's so interesting. This entire network, which really peaked between the 10th and 15th centuries, was primarily established and operated not by the big continental empires, but by Austronesian sailors in Southeast Asia.
So sailors from places like Indonesia and Malaysia.
Exactly. They were using these impressive long-distance sewn plank ships. Alongside them, you had the dhows of Persian and Arab traders, and the robust fleets of Tamil merchants from South India. It was a truly multinational, diverse operation.
And the Chinese came in later?
Yes. The Chinese trade ships, the famous Chuan, eventually became massive and very important, but they followed later. They only became a major force from about the 10th century onward.
And the reach of this maritime route was just as vast as the land routes.
Oh, absolutely. It connected Southeast Asia, East Asia, the Indian subcontinent, the Arabian Peninsula, and then it stretched all the way down the coast of eastern Africa, hitting centers like Zanzibar and Madagascar, and then on to southern Europe. This vast, multi-layered maritime network really proves the case for routes, not road.
We've laid out the sprawling, complex geography. Now let's rewind the clock a bit and look at how this all started and how control shifted between the big imperial powers over time.
Well, we have to remember the true precursors. The foundations for East-West contact were laid long, long before 130 BCE. The overland steppe route across central Eurasia was active for millennia, and it was dominated by horse-riding nomadic communities.
And we have actual physical evidence for this, not just theory.
Oh, absolutely. Archaeology, like the incredible burial ground in Kazakhstan, confirms that nomadic groups like the Aramaspians were already breeding and trading high-quality horses and spreading these exquisite art styles across the steppes.
And we also have those Tarim mummies.
Right, the Tarim mummies, dating back to 1600 BCE, their genetics suggest Indo-European people were in the Tarim Basin long before the Han Dynasty ever pushed west. And there's even Chinese silk from around 1070 BCE found in ancient Egypt, though, to be fair, the origin of that specific silk is still debated.
The sources also really highlight the Scythians as these crucial cultural brokers in the pre-Silk Road era.
They played a massive role. The expansion of Scythian cultures, which stretched from Hungary all the way to the Gansu corridor in China, that fundamentally set the stage. They were responsible for introducing gold to China, where it had been less common before.
And they influenced Chinese art, too.
Profoundly. They inspired Chinese jade carvers to adopt their specific dramatic Scythian-style animal art, those images of animals locked in combat. That motif was totally foreign to China before their influence. These weren't just marauders, they were essential conduits for cultural and material exchange.
So the infrastructure, the cultural framework, it was already there, relying on nomadic mobility. But the true initiation in China, the moment the Chinese Empire formally embraced and secured the whole westward flow, that came around 130 BCE.
And this is a classic case of geopolitical necessity driving economic expansion. The definitive catalyst was the missions of an imperial envoy named Zhang Qin.
He was sent out on a diplomatic mission, right?
He was. Emperor Wu of Han sent him to try and find an alliance with the Yuezhi people against the formidable Xiongnu nomads who were this constant threat on the Han borders. But his reports back to the emperor, detailing these sophisticated urban civilizations in Fergana, Bactria, and Parthia, they revealed a staggering economic opportunity.
Okay, wait a minute. So we named this entire system after Chinese silk, but the actual geopolitical driver for the Han Dynasty getting involved wasn't about selling silk.
Precisely. It was a military need. The Han emperor wanted military superiority, and for that, he desperately needed better horses for his cavalry.
Not just any horses.
No, he wanted the tall, powerful, magnificent horses from Dayuan in the Fergana Valley. The Chinese actually mythologized them as the heavenly horses.
And their desire for these horses was so intense it actually led to a war.
It did. The Han-Dayuan War in the 2nd century BCE. The Han launched a massive expedition and defeated the Dayuan purely to secure access to these crucial mounts. So a massive imperial project, all kicked off by a simple, overwhelming military need.
So that desire for military parity with the Xiongnu is what led directly to China establishing and securing this international trade avenue. And securing it, that must have been a massive, sustained military commitment.
An immense commitment. China extended the Great Wall deep into the west to protect the route. They established garrisons and strategic oases. We have sources citing General Ban Chao, who led an army of 70,000 troops, mounted infantry and light cavalry in the 1st century CE.
70,000 troops.
Just to police the route against bandits.
Yeah.
He pushed conquest all the way across the Pamir Mountains to secure the trade routes, right up to the borders of Parthia. That's how you measure the value of this route to the state.
And that security effort really set the stage for the first great power along the route to the west, the Roman Empire.
The trade just exploded after the Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE. The Romans inherited the Eastern trade networks from the earlier Hellenistic kingdoms, and the demand in Rome for Eastern luxuries, especially Chinese silk, just went through the roof.
And this demand created this kind of moral and economic crisis back in Rome, which is one of the most surprising parts of this whole story.
It was a very real problem. The sources are clear that the massive, unsustainable outflow of Roman gold to pay for these Eastern luxuries was destabilizing their economy.
So they were bleeding gold.
Constantly. And it prompted the Roman Senate to issue several completely futile edicts trying to prohibit the wearing of silk.
On both economic and moral grounds.
Both. The perceived decadence of it was a huge cultural flashpoint.
We have that incredible quote from Seneca the Younger about the perceived immorality of silk clothing. What did he say again?
Oh, he was furious. He railed against it, saying, "Wretched flocks of maids labor so that the adulteress may be visible through her thin dress, so that her husband has no more acquaintance than any outsider or foreigner with his wife's body."
Wow. So this wasn't just an economic issue for him. It was a cultural war on luxury that was impacting Roman politics at the highest level.
A moral panic triggered by see-through fashion. The power of this trade to shape Roman society is just astounding. And the physical reach of their goods was equally staggering.
How far did Roman stuff get?
Astonishingly far. Roman artifacts, especially high-quality Roman-style glassware, have been found as far east as Xiongnu.
Xiongnu, the capital of the Silla Kingdom in Korea.
In Korea. Just think about the dozens of hands and thousands of miles of desert and sea that glass had to travel. This was all facilitated in part by the Kushan Empire, which unified Central Asia and northern India and acted as this powerful trade intermediary.
As the West shifted, so did the trade. Let's move to the Byzantine shift, starting in the 6th century. This includes one of the great historical acts of industrial espionage.
It's one of the most famous stories of the entire route. The Byzantines wanted to break the Chinese monopoly on silk production. It wasn't just about cost, it was strategic.
So what did they do?
In the 6th century, the Emperor Justinian executed this masterful spy mission. He sent 2 Nestorian Christian monks to China and tasked them with stealing the secrets of sericulture.
They weren't just after the knowledge, they were after the source material.
Exactly. They smuggled silkworm eggs out of China, allegedly hidden inside hollow bamboo canes. This allowed the Byzantines to establish their own domestic silk production, primarily in Thrace, finally giving them a manufacturing base in the Mediterranean.
A trade war fought with worms.
It really was.
But the sources say that even after this, the quality of Chinese silk was still way better. And the Byzantines kept up diplomatic contact, right?
They did. The Byzantines, who the Chinese called Fulin, recorded sending embassies to the Chinese Tang court, starting in 643 CE. And those diplomatic contacts continued all the way up to an embassy sent to the Song dynasty in 1081.
That continued connection brings us right to the Tang dynasty golden age in the 7th century. This is a period everyone associates with stability and this massive cultural integration.
The Tang Empire was powerful enough to establish a second Pax Sinica, a Chinese peace, by conquering and subduing Central Asia. They reopened the Silk Road in 639 and then again, crucially, in 699, establishing this strong, secure military presence.
And this made their cities incredibly cosmopolitan.
Unbelievably so. Persian and especially Sogdian merchants flourished in cities like Chang'an, bringing their diverse faiths and languages with them. It was a true peak for the land routes.
But the Tang were also looking out to sea.
Absolutely. The Tang significantly developed the maritime route at the same time. They established a strong Chinese maritime presence that reached deep into the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. Their ships sailed up the Euphrates and connected with ports across Arabia, Egypt, and down the African coast. This dual expansion, land and sea, made the Tang period a real high point for global connectivity.
As Tang power faded, the center of gravity shifted west to the expanding Islamic era starting in the 8th century.
With the expansion of the Islamic world, the main hubs shifted. First Damascus, and then Baghdad under the Abbasid dynasty, became the most important urban node along the entire route. The Islamic Empire secured trade across a vast region from Spain to India.
But it wasn't a completely smooth period.
Not at all. The Battle of Talas in 751 halted Chinese westward expansion, and the An Lushan rebellion inside China dramatically weakened the Tang's ability to police the routes. Still, the Sogdians, those tireless middlemen, just kept driving trade through Central Asia, even as the whole political and religious landscape changed around them.
And even after the devastation of the first Mongol invasions, the cities bounced back.
They did. Samarkand saw this major revival in 1370 under the Turco-Mongol ruler Timur, or Tamerlane. He forcefully moved artisans and intellectuals there, turning it into this critical, beautiful center for trade and culture once again.
Which brings us to the final great imperial chapter of the overland routes, the Mongol Empire. This is the period that created that legendary stability that we all think of.
The Mongol expansion in the 13th and 14th centuries brought this unprecedented political stability across Eurasia, the Pax Mongolica. By controlling the entire route from China all the way west, they eliminated all the internal borders and the conflicts that have plagued the relay system for centuries. They reestablished a secure and open flow of commerce.
And that security must have fundamentally changed who could travel and the sheer volume of goods being moved.
It absolutely did. The stability is what enabled famous travelers like the Venetian Marco Polo to become one of the first Europeans to travel to China and document his time serving Kublai Khan. And at the same time, you had the Moroccan Muslim traveler Ibn Battuta covering massive distances. The Mongol period enabled a scale of east-west travel that was just unparalleled.
It's amazing to think about the economic opportunity in that vast, peaceful territory. But this era of interconnectedness had a truly devastating, unintended consequence.
It did. The sources strongly suggest that the very stability and trade flows that brought so much prosperity also facilitated the rapid spread of disease. The plague, the Black Death, which devastated Europe in the late 1340s, may have originated in marmots in Central Asia.
And it traveled west along these newly unified, Mongol-enabled trade routes.
It seems so. Carried by merchants, fleas on rats, goods. The very routes that brought luxury also served as superhighways for pestilence.
The story of the Silk Routes, though, it goes so much deeper than just luxury goods or imperial power or even disease. The lasting, most profound legacy is its ability to transmit ideas, transform religions, and shape art.
It was a massive cross-cultural blender. The sources point out that this process often led to this deep syncretism, the merging or blending of different cultural and religious beliefs. And you see it even in seemingly hostile interactions, like between the Chinese and the Xiongnu nomads.
How deep did that cultural exchange really go?
It was reciprocal and profound. The Xiongnu adopted Chinese agricultural techniques and dressed where it suited them. But the Chinese, in turn, adopted Xiongnu military styles, music, dance, even some clothing. And what's really surprising is that the freedom of the steppes was so appealing that some Chinese soldiers would actually defect and convert to the Xiongnu way of life.
So nomadic mobility was a key driver in these exchanges.
It was. But perhaps the most profound religious exchange was the transmission of Buddhism. The Silk Road effectively turned Buddhism from a regional Indian faith into a major world religion.
The sources call it the first large-scale missionary movement in world history.
And it was. It began spreading through Central, East, and Southeast Asia in the 1st century CE under the Kushan Empire. But it was the merchants who did the work. They found the teachings appealing, and as they traveled, they established these diaspora communities that became centers of literacy and culture.
And the physical infrastructure of the road literally supported the religion's growth.
Absolutely. The huge network of Buddhist monasteries and stupas along the routes provided essential havens. They were safe places to stay to store goods. In a chaotic world, they offered safety and hospitality.
And in return,
the merchants supported the monasteries financially. They funded the construction of incredible art and architecture. It was this perfect symbiotic relationship that really accelerated the religion's spread.
And the search for authentic scriptures also turned these trade routes into these long, difficult pilgrimage paths.
This is such a powerful testament to the faith. From the 4th century on, Chinese pilgrims began traveling west to India to seek out original Buddhist scriptures. This was a massive, decades-long undertaking.
The most famous being Xuanzang.
Right. Faxian made the journey first. But Xuanzang's trip from 629 to 644 was so epic and so filled with peril that it was later fictionalized in the 16th century novel Journey to the West.
Which gave us the Monkey King, one of the most famous characters in all of Chinese literature.
All based on a real pilgrimage along the Silk Routes. And at the same time, the theology itself was evolving along the route as it met new cultures.
How so?
It was adapting to the marketplace in a way. The rise of Mahayana Buddhism, the great vehicle, gained incredible influence along these routes. Mahayana stressed the elusiveness of physical reality, including material wealth, which created this fascinating tension, a philosophy that discourages material desire being spread along the world's most lucrative, material-driven trade network.
Buddhism wasn't the only faith on the move, though. Christianity, specifically the Nestorian branch, also made its way east.
We have concrete evidence of this. Christianity spread across Persia and Central Asia, and the famous 781 inscribed stele found in China details the arrival and growth of Nestorian Christian missionaries who came via the Silk Road. They brought the Syriac language and their forms of worship all the way to the Tang capital.
And then there's the fascinating case of Judaism on the Silk Road.
Jewish communities began moving east after the Persian conquest of Babylon in 559 BCE, setting up diaspora centers in key trade cities. Over time, these communities naturally moved into commerce and finance. A key group were the Radhanites, Jewish merchants, who fostered really positive trade relationships with groups like the Khazar Turks, helping facilitate commerce between China and Europe.
What's truly counterintuitive here, and something the sources really emphasize, is the powerful influence of Iranian religion on Jewish thought along these routes.
It's a striking and deep example of that syncretism we talked about. Scholars like Richard Foltz note there's overwhelming evidence for Iranian, specifically Zoroastrian influence on the formation of later Jewish religious concepts.
What kind of concept?
The entire cosmology seems to shift. The ideas of paradise or heaven for the good, a separate place of suffering, hell for the wicked, and a clear world-ending apocalypse. These are all traced back to Iranian religious ideas.
And even the figure of the devil.
Yes, a strong, unified figure of a prime evil antagonist that appears to derive from the Iranian concept of Angra. These ideas weren't really present in the same way in earlier pre-exile Judean sources. The Silk routes were vectors for theological mutation.
This cultural mixing also produced entirely new artistic styles.
The best example is probably Greco-Buddhist art. It's an artistic tradition that mashed together Hellenistic, Iranian, Indian, and Chinese influences, especially in the Gandhara region. For centuries, the Buddha was never depicted in human form in India. He was represented by symbols.
And that changes right on the trade routes.
Exactly. Many scholars attribute the shift, the beginning of the human depiction of the Buddha, to direct Greek artistic influence introduced during the Kushan period. It's the physical manifestation of a cultural crossroads. And the trade also involved the raw materials for art, like lapis lazuli, that beautiful blue stone that was ground into pigment for paints across Europe and Asia.
Despite this incredible resilience, the depth of cultural exchange, and the pure economic power of this network, it eventually declined. What were the key factors that caused the Silk routes to fade, starting in the 15th century?
Well, the initial decline was really rooted in political fragmentation. The intense unity imposed by the Mongol Empire completely fell apart as their khanates fragmented. And as that centralized authority disappeared, the large regional powers that emerged became more economically and culturally separate.
So stability was replaced by localized competition, banditry, higher taxes, all of which strangled that relay system.
Exactly. And nomadic power declined sharply during this period, partly due to the Black Death, but also because sedentary civilizations now had gunpowder weapons, which tipped the military balance. The nomads could no longer enforce protection or impose tariffs in the same way.
But even in this phase of fragmentation, one highly organized group still managed to dominate the overland trade for a while.
That would be the Armenians. The sources highlight their extraordinary persistent role. After the Mongol collapse, and right up to the fall of the Safavid Empire in the 1720s, Armenian merchants and financiers had a near monopoly on overland trade.
How did they manage that?
They formed these tightly knit, highly trusted networks, exporting massive amounts of Persian silk, raisins, coffee beans, and precious stones from Turkey and Iran into Europe. They were the last great middlemen of the overland system.
But the real death knell, the thing that finally made the land route obsolete, that came from the sea.
Exactly. The rise of the Ottoman Empire from 1453 onward fundamentally increased the competition, the control, and critically the price of using those key overland routes.
So this geopolitical friction spurred the European powers to find another way.
It did. Portugal, Spain, later the Dutch and English, they all began to aggressively seek alternative maritime routes. And this is what kicks off the Age of Discovery and eventually the colonial era.
It wasn't just a minor shift in preference. It was an inevitable economic choice.
It was an economic death sentence for the overland routes. The shift was overwhelmingly driven by pure cost efficiency. We have sources noting that maritime travel was dramatically cheaper, often only a fifth of the cost of overland transport. Once the navigational technology and the political will were there, the shift to sea power was unstoppable. It drove a new, faster form of globalization and left the ancient Silk routes to fade into history.
And while that ancient system faded, the concept of the Silk Road has not. It's been thoroughly resurrected in our time through modern commemoration and geopolitical ambition.
We see that with global bodies like UNESCO. They've recognized two major corridors of the network as World Heritage Sites: the Jiangtianshan Corridor in 2014, and more recently, the Zarafshan-Karakum Corridor in 2023. It's an acknowledgement of this shared history across dozens of nations.
And globally, the term has been co-opted for these massive, often controversial geopolitical initiatives.
Yes, the phrase New Silk Road now describes monumental, modern infrastructure projects. You have the Eurasian land bridge, and most famously, the massive Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI.
A trillion-dollar strategy.
A trillion-dollar strategy aiming to connect Asia, Europe, and Africa through infrastructure and investment. It reflects this enduring human fascination with connecting these vast distances, but now on an industrial scale.
So what does this all mean? We started by dismissing the romantic myth of a single, dusty road. We've replaced it with this complex, decentralized, and highly durable global economic engine that was constantly adapting to geography, war, and disease.
We've seen that the Silk Road was never one way, but this resilient web of interactions. Its structure was defined by specific needs. The Chinese imperial desire for heavenly horses, Roman demand for decadent silk, the constant entrepreneurial efforts of middlemen like the Saudians and Armenians, and the critical role of nomadic protection.
And all of that served as the vector for massive religious and artistic change. It underscores this profound fact that political history, religious belief, artistic expression, and economic forces are all inextricably tied together, flowing across immense distances.
The ancient world proved that trade will always find a way, even if that way involves highly inefficient relay systems, enormous risks, and fierce competition between land and sea.
The history of the Silk Lights is a history of instability, adaptation, and decentralization. The Sogdians and the Armenians succeeded precisely because the empires failed to fully control the routes. And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. The original Silk routes were characterized by decentralized control, multiple competing paths, and inevitable instability driven by empires rising and falling. The modern New Silk Road projects, especially the BRI, involve massive, singular infrastructure investment and deep geopolitical ambition to unify and control these global flows under one political umbrella.
Given that the ancient system's ultimate resilience was its adaptability and decentralization.
Does the historical pattern of decentralized opportunistic trade and inherent instability still overshadow the ambition of establishing a single unified way to global trade, even with all of our modern technology and resources?
That's the question the ancient world poses to the new global economy.